Sthithi Prakarana, the Sustenance, Chapter 3, the story of Bhima, Bhasa and Dhrida. The sky turned dark with clouds of dust, and it appeared that the sun as well as the light had taken to flight. The climate had changed suddenly as the place was invaded by dust. The breeze, so far quite comfortable and pleasing, made way to a wind that was gathering strength every moment. The people rushed to seek shelters for avoiding the dust storm and also the inevitable rain. It looked as though the water, the wind and the dust had decided to make their presence felt to mankind, which always has a needless high opinion about itself. Nearly 6 hours later, the trio left a trail of destruction in the area with the damaged buildings, twisted electric and telecommunication poles, and uprooted trees. However, when the storm passed, a surprising thing could be noticed, that while the tallest buildings were the most affected, the humble dwellings were the least. The huge trees had been uprooted, and the smaller ones and bushes were not. And the grass could smile happily as it always does at the hesitant sun because nothing had happened to it. Most of us have the notion that the big, the massive, and perhaps the famous is beyond the reach of destruction. If this were true, then the earth would still be ruled by the dinosaurs. Eco-friendly technology is making us aware of the role of mega industries in the quick depletion of the natural resources and the pollution which is both on physical and also the psychological level. Physically, our land, rivers and oceans are being spoiled, and psychologically, our inner peace is being eroded by the introduction of needless desires through the consumerism which makes us buy things we neither need nor can afford. Late 1960s saw a youth rebellion in the West. They rebelled against technology, against hypocrisy, and against the established value system based on the material possessions. There were two streams. One was an escape through the minor and major psychedelic drugs. This became more popular. Even the music they liked or produced had shades of their likes and dislikes. This first stream, known as the flower children, almost succeeded in ruining itself. There was another, a smaller group of people who started searching for an alternate way of life. The second stream turned to the Eastern philosophy and spirituality. Many of these persons discovered the purpose of life. Such defense mechanism of the humanity has been noticed from time to time in the history of mankind. It is like a man walking on tightrope. He balances himself by bending his body to the left and right alternatively to reach the other end of the rope. Only in the case of human behavior, probably, it has to reach the extremes to withdraw itself to the other side. On one side is the inclination towards material growth, which seems to negate spirit totally. On the other side is spirituality, which seems to negate the material. Actually, these inclinations do not negate each other, as each cannot exist without the other. Matter without consciousness is dead, and consciousness cannot manifest itself without matter. They necessarily coexist with each other, but it is only due to the total attention on one the other becomes less important and goes into the background. There are certain drawings or sketches depicting an old lady. When one looks at it from a particular perspective, the figure depicts the old lady. From another perspective, it resembles a young girl or a woman. The beauty of the sketch lies in the fact that one can see only one at a time. The human perspective appears to be somewhat similar, and the key lies in utilizing both the matter and the spirit for transcending duality. This has been very logically explained by the Vedanta through two key words: drashta, the seer or the perceiver, and drishyam, the seen, or the objective world perceivable by the senses. Yoga Vasistha observes that drishyam has only a relative existence depending on the drashta, the seer, assumes screens of raga, likes, and dvesha, dislikes, through sankalpa or the primary vibration, which is a potential desire. Raga and dvesha give birth to the grosser manifestations like fear, anger, and jealousy. We observe that these manifestations are absent in an infant, as ahankara or I-ness has not yet developed in it. Consequently, the perception of the world is very clear and strong, but over the years it learns through either the milieu or the gathered information to include the description of the world in its perception and gradually overlook the perception entirely and to stick to the description. But the infant's bliss is through its ignorance. Ignorance is bliss, while the aspired state of is qualitatively different as being childish and childlike. Normally, an infant is not enlightened. Its innocence is out of its ignorance, purity an outcome of inexperience, and awe or sense of mystery is due to lack of maturity. An enlightened person is definitely like an infant, pure and guileless, but at the same time, there is total understanding. Innocence is because of the innate trust, and purity owing to the complete detachment to the drishyam, the world of objects. In such a person, the I has dropped, and there is no one to interpret or opine or color the experience. While in a child, the I is in a potential or seed form, as it only awaits the congenial condition for manifestation and growth. Ahankara, the I amness, is at various levels. The grossest being, I am this body, and the subtlest is the feeling of being. And according to its level of manifestation, it is either helpful or otherwise to the seeker. The ahankara gets ripened through the vichara or the meditative contemplation on the suggestions of the scriptures, the company of the holy, as well as the experiences life has for us. It ultimately falls on its own like a ripe fruit or a dried leaf. The present sarga is a continuation of the previous one, intended for stressing the value of the spiritual literature and the need to understand the differentiation of the three ahankaras or the egos at the three planes of consciousness. Warning against the tendency of the mind for involvement and indulgence, the venerable sage Vasistha said that one reaps only pain through the identification with the worldly possessions like sons and other relationships. While the surest way of elimination of the worldly malady is the large-heartedness. Such persons who have become one with Brahman have nothing to fear, as they are ever protected, just as the universes are protected. Only such ones who have elevated themselves with true love and are ever engaged in ceaseless vichara can be called as men. The rest of mankind is merely brutes. In spite of being afflicted with life's problems, and whatever the consequence, one should not perform such actions which result in their involvement and indulgence. An action is good or otherwise, depending on its result of reducing the activity of the mind. Even a noble action having wrong or vicious motivation has adverse and harmful effects, like Rahu, who had to suffer in spite of drinking the Amrutam or the elixir of immortality. After the Amrit Manthan, churning of the ocean for elixir, Rahu had to suffer by having his head cut off for partaking the Amrutam through unfair means. The men of stable mind never get carried away by the lower temptations and hungers, as they have reached higher states through the mastery over the senses and mind. If the readers of Atmajnana works meditate regularly on the truths enshrined therein, the mind gets ripened by degrees to ultimately achieve the infinite Atman. The sage then advised Rama to be careful of egoism or fear or laziness, and to treat the path as laid down in the spiritual scriptures, and to take shelter under the benign feet of the enlightened wise for crossing over the ocean of samsara. The enlightened persons help those who approach them in annihilating the ahankara, clouding the being. This sprout called ahankara has its branches of I and mine everywhere, and I can be destroyed completely only by the fire of jnana or wisdom. Rama inquired from the Rishi about the nature of ahankara, about the ways of mastering it, the result of such mastery, and whether a person associated with the vasanas of the body can achieve it. Vasistha replied that there are 3 levels of ahankara according to 3 akashas, or the planes of consciousness. Of these, 2 are always beneficial, and the third is to be always shunned. The awareness achieved through vichara and viveka or discrimination, which enables one to know that the multiple worlds and the supreme principle are part of the self, is the supreme ahankara. The awareness that the self is eternal and subtler than the exterior universe, which is perceivable by the mind and senses and transcends the universe, is the second ahankara. Jivan muktas, or the liberated, usually dwell on these 2 levels and help seekers to cross over the samsara. The consciousness which identifies with the limited mind, senses, body is the third and the grossest ahankara. Most of us are the slaves of the ahankara at this third level. After suffering, all suffering is a consequence of this ahankara and is the root cause of rebirth. This puny ahankara is to be eliminated at whatever the cost. And sooner one annihilates this by elevating oneself to the 2 higher ahankara, the earlier one becomes recipient to Brahmic bliss. And to illustrate the characteristics of 3 ahankaras, the sage narrated the following story, which was only a continuation of the story told in the previous sarga. After the destruction of the asuras, Dama and others, Shambharika became greatly incensed against the devas. Analyzing his mistakes in the earlier venture, he discovered that the asuras could be forced to be victims of ahankara and hence fear, etc., as they lacked atmajnana. This time he created 3 more asuras, Bhima, Bhasa and Dhrida, who were stainless without any influence of the mind. They were enlightened without a trace of either doubt or desire. They fought with the devas relentlessly for countless years. Whenever the idea of I and mine entered their mind, they probed within to seek the origin of I through subtle vichara, and the I and mine vanished like wealth from the non-charitable person. And such persons who have freed themselves from ahankara through atma vichara are never touched by fear and are content with whatever they have or get. They have the equipoise to guard them under all circumstances. That was how Bhima, Bhasa, and Dhrida were able to defeat the Devas repeatedly. Devas approached Vishnu and sought asylum and help. Having assured them of his help, he reached the battlefield and flung his weapon Sudarshana, the discus. The 3 asuras were burnt and were carried at once to Vaikuntha, the abode of Vishnu. Thus, vasanas cause bondage, and with their disappearance, one attains to freedom. Concluding the story, Vasistha urged Rama to develop Viveka through constant Atma Vichara. As the previous sarga, which suggests 3 qualities to go away from the divine, this story gives 3 qualities necessary for experiencing the divine. Bhima means formidable or tremendous. Bhasa is to be taken as light, luster, or brightness. And Dhrida indicates stability and firmness. By introducing the 3 levels of ahankara, the sage clarifies it. The 3 qualities suggested by the names of the asuras appear to be 3 methods of freeing oneself from the bonds of ahankara. This becomes very clear if we try to peep into the characteristics of these 3 ahankaras. The grossest ahankara identifies itself with the body sense mind complex, and the characteristic feature of this complex is the instability. By the nature, mind is restless, the senses are wayward, and the body totally unstable. One can control all of them by dhridatva or firmness. The intermediate ahankara is that which separates itself from the manifested world. In other words, it differentiates itself from the world and overcomes the misery generated by the involvement and indulgence as evident from the so-called normal life. But even then, there is the feeling of dvaita, the otherness. This otherness can be combated through bhasa, the light of awareness. And the supreme ahankara is that which makes one aware that the world and all experiences are part of the one which is whole. This releases us from most of our limitations, because there is total negation with the dual nature and identification with the whole. But even then, it is not complete, as there is still the trace of identification. This is where the 3rd asura, Bhima, or bigness, becomes helpful through the identification with the infinite. The 2 ahankaras, that is, awareness and identification with the infinite, no doubt have no binding effect. On the contrary, they are helpful in transcending the limits of the mind-sense material world. But just as one need not retain the needle after removing the thorn from the body, one does not need these ahankaras after the enlightenment. This is how, in the story, these 3 helpers are referred to as the asuras, and Vishnu, the sustenance function of reality, himself eliminated them with his discus. This aspect has been very beautifully explained by Sri Ramakrishna through a parable. Once, a rich man was passing through a forest. When 3 robbers surrounded him and robbed him of all his wealth, after snatching all his possessions from him, one of the robbers said, "What's the good in keeping this man alive? Kill him." Saying this, he was about to strike their victim with his sword when the second robber interrupted and said, "There is no use of killing him. Let's bind him fast and leave him here. Then he won't be able to tell the police." Accordingly, the robbers tied him with a rope, left him, and went away. After a while, the 3rd robber returned to the rich man and said, "Ah, you are badly hurt, aren't you? Come, I am going to release you." The 3rd robber set him free and led him out of the forest. When they came near the highway, the robber said, "Follow this road and you will reach home easily." "But you must come with me too," said the man. "You have done so much for me. We shall all be happy to see you at home." "No," said the robber. "It's not possible for me to go there. The police will arrest me." So saying, he left the rich man after pointing out this way. Now, the first robber who said, "What's good of keeping this man alive? Kill him," is tamas. It destroys. The second robber is rajas, which binds the man to the world and entangles him in the variety of activities. Rajas makes him forget God. Sattva alone shows the way to God. It produces virtues like compassion, righteousness, and devotion. Again, Sattva is like the last step of the stairs. Next to it is the roof. The Supreme Brahman is man's own abode. One cannot attain knowledge of Brahman unless one transcends the three gunas. The lowest ahankara, which identifies itself with the mind-sense-body complex, is tamasic and rajasic, destructive and binding as the asuras Dama, Vyala and Kata, while the sattvic ahankara is like the asuras of the present sarga, or the subtler ahankara is asuric or demoniac. The I amness happens to be the root cause of all the ills of existence. At the grossest level, it gets indulged with the world of sense objects, and at the subtler levels, it identifies with the mind and ideas to make us victims of pride and egoism or egotism. The two stories illustrate the evils of ahankara and give us the means to annihilate it. Whether it is the dust storm or a tornado having the destructive power, it can and does destroy life and property. But the blades of grass remain untouched by it. The blade of grass is too insignificant for the tornado to touch. Not only that the blade allows the cyclonic wind to pass over it without any resistance, but it retains its original strength. Life is full of trials and tribulations for those who have identified and have sustained the ahankara. But those who try to become nothing, just flow with the existence, never even leave their footprints on the sands of time. But yes, they leave behind a fragrance that has a soothing effect on the existence.